discussion is the third of this series, which will include at least one more in the very near future. So after wishing you a thoughtful, insightful, and fruitful conversation on the Kurdish role in a changing region, let me give the floor to Dr. Charountaki to make a short introduction and coordinate the following discussion. Doctor, please proceed. Thank you.
Lucas, thank you very much. I think it's not been left much to add, but I do believe that it's a critical point at which the Kurdish role, broadly speaking, in the region of the Middle East is playing, and I think it will continue to play a critical, if you like, role with an input. I think also like for international politics, to the extent that we see how regional dimensions are affecting really the different fora that they are taking place on an international level. For me, it's very important that today we have representation both from Iraq and Syria, given the fact that both countries are found really in the heart of the Middle East and of the regional developments. And to a great extent, I think they will be part in this formulation of what we call transition period that the region is found at. In any way, I think that also external, if you like, inputs are also very vital for a broader understanding of the theme that we are looking at today. And that's why I would like to start with Yerevan Saeed, research associate in Washington, D.C. He is a researcher at the Arab Gulf Studies Institute. I think, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for being here today. And of course, I would like to thank all of the participants because you were sort of without any sort of frustrations, without difficulties, you were very flexible to contribute to this online meeting. But I think will have a great impact as well, broadly speaking, for the rest of our audience, either they are academics or policymakers and so forth. Yerevan, shall we start with you? Thank you very much.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much for having me. And certainly on this very important topic about the Kurds in the Middle East. For me, I think two very important shifts are happening in the Middle East, and they could have really some serious repercussions for the Kurds. The first one is the potential in the Middle East, in particular in Iraq, and route these resources to the Far East to counter a rise in China. And this has led to a second factor, which is the realignment of the regional politics and the trend towards reconciliation between some of the states that have been antagonistic towards one another, at least for the last 10 years. Both of these could have dire consequences because of like two really well-established factors. The first one is the US is the main security guarantor of the Kurds in the Middle East, in particular for the KRG since 1991. And secondly, Kurds tend to do very well when there are crises in the Middle East. I know that's a very unfortunate state of affairs, but that's a fact. Like when there's harmony and peace, among the states in the Middle East, there is some sort of denial of the Kurdish rights. So at this moment, some of the countries, Iran, Turkey, the Gulf countries, they are all hedging their bets about, because the US is trying to some sort of not really exit from the Middle East, but there is some sort of a very powerful argument in Washington, D.C. that the Middle East is not that important strategically for the US. Therefore, the US has to reroute its resources to the Far East to rise China. And arguably, this has led to some sort of, this has, the previous political divergence and polarization that we saw that shaped it and defined the Middle East for the last 10 years is likely to be replaced by a realignment and political convergence among the states that have been on different sides of conflict in the Middle East. you can see these reorientations of diplomatic, political, economic relations between Turkey and Egypt, between Turkey and the Gulf countries, as well as temporary tensions between Iran and the Gulf countries, especially Saudi Arabia. For the Gulf countries, this sort of tempering down tension is more about security because of Washington pivot toward China, pivot to focus on China. And also for them, probably it's not clear who's going to fill in this potential vacuum in the region. It is for this reason that the Gulf countries are looking for some sort of rapprochement with Iran and Turkey. On the other hand, we see some of the Arab countries, especially the UAE, also seeking some sort of one-on-one security pact with Washington. It's not clear if they're going to get it or not, but they're pushing very aggressively. So if sovereign strong states like the Gulf countries start to worry about the result of the US withdrawal in the region, then in my view, the Kurds are in serious trouble. On the other hand, for Turkey and Iran, these rapprochements are more about the economic, more economic motives behind them, because Turkey has a declining economy, probably needs investment from and capital from the Gulf countries, and also for Iran, the same case can be argued. So, as I mentioned, the US has been security guarantor for the KRG since 1991, and despite the ups and downs, of course, it has not been linear. There has been lots of feelings of betrayal by the Kurds in 1991, in 2017, and also in 2018 in Rojava as well. So if the Kurds, if the US is going to withdraw from Iraq, even if it's going to reduce its forces in Iraq, then the Kurds will be on their own. In this very hostile neighborhood, they have to deal with these neighbors that really are antagonistic to the Kurdish national interests. And let me explain, why this rapprochement between these states that I mentioned in the Middle East could be bad for Kurds. Unfortunately, if you look at the history in the past, when there has been harmony between these states, it leads to some sort of denial and also abrogation of the British rights. In other words, Kurds tend to rise and have better political maneuvering, develop politically, economically, and culturally when fault lines really exist among these states. I know, as I mentioned, this is really not ideal, but that's something that reflects the reality of the Kurds in the Middle East. When the harmony exists between these countries, it has really spilled into some sort of translated into a catastrophe for the Kurds, the genocide campaigns perpetrated by Iraq. We even did not see even a condemnation by these countries. But for when Iraq invaded Kuwait, some sort of crack has happened between Iraq and the neighboring country, that it just really opened the space for the Kurds to exercise some of their political, cultural, and also economic rights. And if we move forward for the last 10 years, especially after the Arab Spring, which caused a loss of risk between Turkey and the Gulf countries, to Turkey and Egypt, we saw that this translated into some sort of political and also economic support for the Kurds, both in the KRG and also in Rojava as well. So the question is, what the Kurds can do. So these are challenges that the Kurds probably in the short term have to really try to deal with. Are they going to seek some sort of settlement with a national government with their neighboring countries? If yes, how they are going to sustain, or how they can make sure that these agreements will be respected in the future. And because it is just very, very hard to see how even if the Kurds will get some sort of reassurance from the national governments that they are existing, whether it's Turkey, Iran, Iraq or Syria, it's very hard to see how these agreements will be respected and sustained in the absence of a third party. For example, like the US, the UN, or other countries. But are the Kurds relevant at the moment in the Middle East? Of course they are, because I think because of the fight against ISIS, against Islamic extremism. But I think the stem of this argument is going to finish or end very, very quickly, and then the Kurds really have to try to define their grand strategy, how they are going to handle the fallout as a result of the US probably withdrawal in Iraq. And for Syria, it's really not clear. But Biden administration has really not shown commitment to protecting the Kurds in Syria as well. So I will leave it there, and we probably can discuss more during the Q&A question.
Thank you very much, Yerevan, and being punctual on time. Maybe we can also reflect a bit on opportunities, and I would like now to pass the floor to Mrs. Zozan Alloush, member of the Syrian Democratic Council for Foreign Relations in Europe. And we are very delighted to have you with us today, and thank you very much for your presence.
Thank you very much, Marianna, and thank you for Mr. Yerevan. I think he highlighted many, many important points. So I will try to be more local in my talk, as he already talked about the region and the Kurds, the relation between the Kurds and the region, and when the topic of the Kurdish role in the region, all the time I ask myself, will the Kurds be allowed to play a role in the region? Because this was our fight since the beginning of our fight for the Kurdish rights first, and then which lead us to fight for other things in the region. Actually, since the beginning of the revolution in Syria, we try to not be part of the fight for the power, and I think this is the biggest role or the biggest good decision we did in Syria, especially not being part of the opposition, part of the regime, because the two of them are fighting for the power, and I think the Kurds are not fighting for the power in general now, especially in Syria and Iraq and other of other regions. Now, what we are challenging, I think, is first of all the mentality of the region does not accept to be leading. This is the main challenge from my experience. The second one is all the time the solution the Kurds talk about, it's not acceptable in the background of the people in the region. I will explain myself. In 2012, the first one who talked about decentralization were Kurds. So it wasn't accepted even in Syria to talk about the topic. Now, after 11 years of a lot of blood, many people died, many people are refugee, IDP. The people in Syria begin to talk about decentralization after 11 years. We talked about confederalism, it wasn't accepted. We talked about the rights of the ethnic people, wasn't accepted. We talked about the culture right, and I think Mr. Kino can add later, and wasn't accepted in Syria in general. In one talk, I was in Brussels, so we talked about the decentralization, and there was people from Idlib, people from the regime area. So I asked just very honestly, why you are talking about this topic after 10 years? They said because the Kurd wasn't allowed to talk about what they think, and we will not be led by Kurds. I mean, maybe I'm talking about very simple issues, but it's very important issues if you want to understand why the Kurds are not allowed to play a role. Now, if we try to give them some space to play the role, I think they begin fighting for the Kurdish rights. This fight can change many issues in the region because the chemistry of the region is boiled after the Ottoman Empire. It's boiled on dividing the Kurds. So if we talk about now how we find a solution for the Kurdish topic, I think this will lead us to changing this region. And this change can be democratic change, can be human rights change, women's rights change, ethnic change, culture change, the change of accepting the Kurdish rights will lead to change many things, many issues in the region. Unfortunately, we cannot see the light because Mr. Yerevan talked about, we cannot as Kurds lead alone because Middle East is boiled on the support of foreign powers. I mean, now we cannot say that, yes, we will fight, we will lead by ourselves. Now, for example, Turkey is just trying to attack Northeast one more time. Erdogan is talking about Rifat, is talking about Northeast. So while you are fighting for your presence, you are fighting for your life, you cannot lead for change because change needs some peace, some stability, some time to reflect on what, how, and what is changing in the region in Northeast or in Syria in general. We fight against ISIS, we stopped ISIS, and now we are talking that, for example, America can leave, and if they leave, that means Northeast is in danger. When you are in danger, you cannot lead a role to change, for example. But I think if we talk now, we reflect on the last 10 years, what the Kurds did in region, and I will talk about in general now about the Syria and Iraq, for example, because there are two status we can reflect and talk about. You will see that the Kurds already leaded for some change. I mean, now the decentralization wasn't accepted in Iraq before. Now we can see it in Iraq, and we are trying to make the model in Syria, maybe in different ways. But I think it's leading that. Now you can see the talk about the women's rights, and I will talk about this issue. For example, I was with Mr. de Mistura in talking about the role of the multicultural people in Syria, for example. So we demand the 30% of women, presence women in CC, in the Geneva talk. I think we lead for that. For example, we did some change on that in the mentality. So now we are talking about self-administration. Idlib is talking about self-administration. Syria regime area are talking about self-administration. So this is the changing of governance. The model of the governance wasn't accepted before the Kurds talked about it. And when I say the Kurd, for example, in Northeast, it doesn't mean exactly only the Kurds, because without others, ethnic people, we couldn't do it, but we lead for that. But all the time we are in danger. I mean, when you are in danger, how you will try to make it for better or playing a better role? Now, for example, we have in Syria three geographic. We have Idlib, we have Syrian regime area, and we have the self-administration area. Somehow the regime is doing some victory. It's a time for the Kurds, for example, to lead a democratic opposition, which is very difficult now. If you want some change in Syria, you need a democratic opposition which can make balance between the regime controlled area and all the things. So it's not allowed because you are in danger all the time. Some of the opposition is in Turkey, some opposition is in Arabic Gulf. They have their interest in Syria, they have interest in Iraq. And the main time you have the US interests in the region. Are they interested anymore or not? Will they lead or support some change in the region or not? So my point is maybe trying to just explain that it's not the issue of of if the Kurds will play a role or not, or if they want to play or not. The main issue now is, will they be allowed to play a role or not? Will they be supposed to play a role or not? Because by on yourself, you cannot do it. You need some support. And this is the importance of my work, for example, here in Europe, that the European Union should support the people who are trying to do some change and who are trying to work for some democracy in this region and stop this war. I mean, how much time we need just to accept that, okay, maybe as a Kurds, we don't need a Kurdistan, but let the Kurds be real citizens where they are living and having some role in this region, for example. So in general, I will try to stop here. I just will see how the conversation is. Maybe I will add some topic later.
Very interesting. Thank you very much for your input. I think at this stage is very important, since we talked about the political representation a bit, about how maybe political means can bring or can work as tools in this change that we're talking about. I think I would like at this stage to welcome General Hajar Ismail, Senior Advisor at the Ministry of Peshmerga, member of the Reform Committee. So I think you have loads of things to contribute to this discussion. Thanks very much for your presence today here with us.
Thank you very much, Marianna, for having me. I'm glad to see my friend Yerevan, and already you had very good discussion. Good job, Zozan. You had very good speech. I would like to be more talking about Peshmerga forces, the role of the Peshmerga in Iraq, the challenges that we are facing in Iraq and maybe around the country. First, a little bit about the history. You know, the Kurdish people in Iraqi Kurdistan, they uprised in 1991 against the previous Saddam's regime. So after withdrawal of the regime in Kurdistan region, since 1991 until 2003, we were not independent country and we were not real part of Iraq. In 2003, the Peshmerga forces and the Kurdish people participated in the freedom operation against Saddam's regime. So we participated with US and the coalition forces to change Saddam's regime. And our leadership, they played vital role, excuse me, to build new Iraq. So we thought we're gonna have a new democratic Iraq, we will have a new page. And also our leadership, they played vital role in writing the Iraqi constitution. And the majority of the Iraqi people voted for the Iraqi constitution in 2005. And also the Peshmerga forces, they played vital role building the new Iraqi army. So I was with the first group, we established the new Iraqi army. So in the beginning, there was balance within the new Iraqi army between the Sunni, Shia, and the Kurd. But after the Shia came on power, honestly, they did the same mistake as Saddam did in the past, and as the Sunni did in the past also. So the Shia, they tried to control the power, they tried to control the forces, the security forces. Even in 2005, we can say there was a civil war between Sunni and Shia. The Kurd and the Peshmerga played a good role to be mediator or to be peace forces between the Sunni and Shia forces. And also the Peshmerga played a very good role fighting the other terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda, Ansar al-Islam, Ansar al-Sunnah, and Naqshbandiya. Then in 2014, when Daesh showed up, honestly, Daesh, they took advantage of two important things. One, civil war in Syria. The second point, Daesh took advantage of the bad policy of the Iraqi federal government. Before 2014, many Sunni Arab people protested for their right. And instead, the Iraqi government, the Iraqi army listened to them, they used forces against them. So when Daesh showed up, many Sunni Arab people joined ISIS, including the security officers and soldiers. So Daesh, they became from terrorist group, they became to terrorist country, and they announced their Khilafat in Iraq and Syria. So really, in the beginning, we faced a difficulty to stop and to face Daesh because we had very limited resource, very limited equipment, an old weapon, not enough ammunition. Because by law and constitution, Peshmerga force is part of Iraqi defense system. But this is also one of the biggest debate between KRG and Iraqi federal government, which is the Peshmerga forces. By law and constitution, we should receive our budget, our rights, our ammunition, our weapons from the Iraqi side. But never the Iraqi government provided 1 penny or ammunitions for the Peshmerga forces. So in 2014, the Peshmerga faced a difficulty to stop and face Daesh. But after we had a brave decision from US and the coalition forces, when they decided to support the Peshmerga force and the Iraqi security forces, so everything changed. We tried to retook and recontrol the city after city and village after village. Thanks God, we've been able to push back ISIS in Kurdish and disputed territories, in Kurdistan and disputed territories. Then we, in 2016, President Masoud Barzani went to Baghdad. He said, we are ready to cooperate with the Iraqi security forces to liberate Mosul, and we are ready to support the Iraqi army. And we did. We opened 3 tactical assembly area in our area, in Kurdistan area. And we agreed about the joint plan to liberate Mosul. A part of the plan that the Peshmerga forces should fight ISIS in the Mosul plain and to destroy the defense line of the Daesh in Mosul plain. And we did. ISIS, they had the strongest defense line in Mosul plain. We defeated Daesh in Mosul plain. Then we opened a safe corridor for the Iraqi army to enter Mosul because they were very far from Mosul. They entered Mosul, and we had a joint plan, an agreement with the Iraqi security forces that when Iraqi security forces enter Mosul, they should open a corridor for ISIS in order to push them to go outside of the city of Mosul and to have a kill zone for ISIS to fight them in outside of the city of Mosul. But unfortunately, by a pressure of neighboring country, they fought ISIS inside the city of Mosul. And honestly, they destroyed the west side of Mosul. And if we go to Mosul, especially the west side of Mosul, still maybe we can find hundreds of bodies under the destroyed houses. So if we look to the situation now, what's happened after 5 years fighting ISIS? ISIS, the Iraqi federal government announced the defeat of ISIS in 2017. But the reality, ISIS not destroyed. ISIS, Daesh still exists. They are increasing terrorist activities, especially when the Peshmerga withdraw in Kirkuk and disputed territories. When the Iraqi government, they used force against the Peshmerga and the Kurdish people after our referendum. So after our fighting with the Iraqi security forces in 2017, we had new lines. So the Iraqi security forces, they have their new defense line, and we have our new defense line. So there is a big security vacuum between both lines. So Daesh taking advantage of this security vacuum, this gap. So about that, day after day, Daesh taking advantage of the gap and increasing terrorist activities, especially in Kirkuk, south of Kirkuk, Hamrin Mountain, Karachuk Mountain, and especially Diyala also. Now, almost for 2 years, we have dialogue and negotiation with Iraq to reestablish joint security mechanism between Iraq and Peshmerga forces. Finally, we have an agreement with the Iraqi army to reestablish or to establish 2 joint brigades, specifically for the disputed territories. Tomorrow, we have a meeting with the Iraqi delegation about 2 joint brigades. Already, we established 2nd joint coordination centers between the Peshmerga and the Iraqi army, 1 in Baghdad, 1 in Erbil, and 4 on the ground in Khanaqin, Kaywan, Makhmur, and Kasik in Mosul area. Because in the past also we had joint security mechanism between 2009 until 2014. But when Daesh showed up, it was the end of the joint security mechanism. And again, as I said, Daesh, they took advantage of the civil war in Syria and bad policy of the Iraqi government. because really the Iraqi federal government at that time, we can say Maliki's government, they had very bad policy toward Sunni, toward Kurd, toward minorities. But if we look to the situation, what's happened, personally, I believe now we have more challenges, more issues in Iraq than 2014. For example, in 2014, we had joint security mechanism between the Peshmerga and the Iraqi army, and the relationship between the Peshmerga and the Iraqi army was much better than now. And also, there was no Shia militia groups. Beside of ISIS, which is still threat on the Iraqi people, on the Iraqi government, on Peshmerga, on the Iraqi army. But now we have a Shia militia groups, which is, I believe, they are more threat for the future of Iraq. They are threat for the Shia itself. They are big threat for the Sunni, for the Kurd as well. Because we have more than 60, 70 different Shia groups uncontrolled by the Iraqi federal government, uncontrolled by the Iraqi prime minister. And the problem, they made a law for Hashd al-Sha'bi, and they passed Hashd al-Sha'bi law in one day. And now Hashd al-Sha'bi, they become legally in Iraq, and they are receiving a huge budget. And almost for 16 years, we are waiting as a Peshmerga forces to receive our budget, but no way. We never received 1 penny from the Iraqi federal government. So I believe ISIS still exists and increasing terrorist activities, taking advantage of instability of the situation in Iraq, especially they are taking advantage of the gap and the security vacuum between the Peshmerga line and the Iraqi security line. And also the biggest threat, Shia militia groups uncontrolled by the Iraqi federal government. We can say not all of them, some Shia groups still they are listening to the Iraqi government. Some of them they are listening to Al-Marja'iyya. Some they are belong to Sadr, but there are 4 or 5 Shia big groups. They are implementing neighboring agenda in Iraq. They are trained by neighboring country. They are receiving a huge budget from neighboring country. And the problem with Shia groups, they are not just, they are trying to control the security forces, but also they are trying to control the power, the government. The best example, they participated in last election, and honestly, they had big coalition within the Iraqi parliament. And they had many people within the Iraqi government in different ministries, for example, in Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Interior, and other ministries. This time also they participated in election, but looks like the biggest Shia militia groups, they lost election, or they are not happy with the result of the election. So Iraq not stable. Still, those groups, they are refusing the result of election. We are not sure what's the situation it will be in Baghdad and how the Iraqi government will deal with those Shia groups. Because right now they are protesting, they are refusing the result of the Iraqi election. And also we have another issue in Iraq, which is the Pkk Turkey issue. Unfortunately, for many years, our leadership, they tried to bring PKK on table, and they encouraged PKK to solve their issues peacefully through dialogue and negotiation with Turkey. Even they were successful to bring both sides on table, and they started dialogue and negotiation. But unfortunately, suddenly PKK, they destroyed everything after they killed traffic policemen. So now PKK, unfortunately, they are giving a reason to Turkey to share our area, to send their forces to do operation in Kurdistan region. So far, we have 500 villages, the people refusing to go back to their villages because the fighting between PKK and Turkey. So we see there are many challenges in Iraq. But as a Peshmerga forces, we fought ISIS in the past, and we've been successful to fight ISIS with support from the coalition forces. Really fighting ISIS without support from the coalition, it was very difficult for the Peshmerga. The support from the coalition force, especially the airstrikers, was very important for the Peshmerga to stop and to face ISIS and to defeat ISIS. Now, since 2017, we have Peshmerga reform program. As you know, we have a big number of the Peshmerga forces. We have some forces, we call them Unit 70s and Unit 80s. We have planned to bring all the forces under the umbrella of the Ministry of Peshmerga. I am the co-founder of the Peshmerga reform program. We are working on the Peshmerga reform program since 2017, and we have a coalition forces. We have a senior advisors from US, from UK, Germany, and Netherlands. They are supporting the Peshmerga forces and the Ministry of Peshmerga for the Peshmerga reform program. And also US providing good support for the Peshmerga forces. But if we compare the support that US providing to the Iraqi army and what they provided to the Peshmerga forces, we can't compare their support for the Iraqi army and what they provided to the Peshmerga forces. They provided much, much more for the Iraqi army. And unfortunately, when Daesh showed up in 2014, the Iraqi army collapsed with no fighting, with no reason, with no clashes. And they left all their weapons, tanks,
I think we have, an internet a connection problem, but maybe the general returns back soon.
Provided to the Iraqi army in the past. So we still hope US provide more support for the Peshmerga forces. We still hope US continue remain in Kurdistan region and in Iraq. I am the member of the Iraqi strategic dialogue I'm the member of the Iraqi delegation for the strategic dialogue between Iraq and US. We had many meetings with US in Iraq and US. I was in US in last July about the strategic dialogue between US and Iraq. US, they decided to change their mission in Iraq by the end of this year. There will be no any more fighters in Iraq, no combat forces. They said just we're gonna have trainers and advisors to support the Iraqi army and the Peshmerga forces. And it was the request of the Iraqi army, the Iraqi government, and the Kurdistan region, and the Peshmerga forces. But still, there are many Shia groups. They are against this agreement between Iraqi federal government and US government. They are saying US should withdraw in Iraq. And of course, neighboring countries also like Iran, they are asking US to withdraw in Iraq. And we see for 15 years, we had no good government in Iraq. Finally, we had good government in Baghdad, led by Kadhimi. But unfortunately, he was weak prime minister, and we had weak government in Baghdad because they were under the pressure of neighboring countries, and they were under the pressure of many Shia militia groups. And those Shia militia groups, they are not implementing the orders by the Iraqi prime minister or not listening to the Iraqi prime minister. So let's see how the result of the negotiation will be for announcing the new government in Baghdad. I believe it will be not easy for Shia, because they are majority, to announce the new government in Baghdad, because now there is strong competition between the Shia militia groups with different groups. So Sadr, the biggest party in Baghdad now, we can say they are the winner of the election. But of course, just Sadr alone, they cannot announce the new government. As I said, there are many challenges in Iraq and around the country. We hope US continue to support the Peshmerga force and the Iraqi army. If US withdraw in Iraq, it will be a disaster for the region, for Iraq and for Kurdistan region. Many times when we had dialogue and negotiation with US, they are saying Iraq is not Afghanistan. But in the other hand, US saying we are in Iraq by the invitation of the Iraqi federal government. So we are not sure for how long the Iraqi federal government allow US stay in Iraq, or maybe they're gonna say if we have a new government, we don't know. Are they gonna extend their invitation for US and the coalition forces to remain in Iraq or not? With that, I will include my speech. So if there's a question, I will be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much, General. Thank you very much. Last but not least, General Kino Gabriel, former spokesman of the SDF forces, Syrian Democratic Forces. Thank you very much. And I think that your contribution would also be vital in the discussion today. A great extent of what we are calling now the role of the Kurds in the region is very much focused on the developments that are about to take place, will take place in the case of Syria, especially when we are talking about the end of the fight against ISIS, the future of Syria, and at the end of the day, all these sort of perpetuating crises for the past like 10, 11 years, it's very interesting as to maybe what sort of challenges do you think that, will further bring into the developments, or you are sort of more optimistic vis-a-vis the opportunities that are possible to appear? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marianna, for this opportunity to talk about the situation. And I think this topic, is very important to talk about. Also, I would like to include that as we are speaking about the Kurdish role in a changing region, I think it's important also to focus on the role of the different ethnic groups that they are playing in this region. I think one of the problems that the area, even the Kurds, are facing is to continually focus on one subject, one ethnic group, one religious group, or etc. in this region, that makes it, I think, eventually a target for what my colleagues talked about, both Mr. Saeed and Mrs. Alloush before. I think eventually the ideas and the thoughts that both my colleagues brought are correct. I would like to assert them, and also I think to add that those opportunities that the Kurdish people is always finding to play a role in this region come through times of chaos and through times of maybe war. That is correct, but also it is something logical, because every time this area changed, starting from or basically starting after, let's say, World War I, and later after the independence from the different colonial forces in the area, and after it through the war between the right and the left, which was during the Cold War, etc., coming to now. Those were the times that both the Kurds and also I would like to mention other ethnic groups, the Arabs, the Syriacs, the Armenians, etc., all of them saw the time, or saw the opportunity to play their role and to try to achieve and get their rights in those areas that they are living in. The same goes, I think, for the problems that we are facing. Also, both the Kurdish people and also the other groups who have been oppressed through decades of different regimes in the area, either in Turkey or Iran or Syria or Iraq or even other countries in the Middle East. Those countries have, I think, something in common among all of them, which is a government that believes in one color of people, all those countries are trying to enforce one identity over their citizens, and through this they are denying the identity of all the different ethnic and religious components of the area. So what the Kurds are facing, the denial of their rights and their existence from the area, either in Turkey or Iraq previously, I think previously to 1990, and also in Syria till recently, also goes to the Syriacs and also to some extent to the Armenians and Cherkess and other ethnic groups. I think that is why both Iran and Turkey currently are considered the biggest challenge that the Kurdish people, also the Syriac people, and also the Arab people are facing in this changing region, because their interests and their ideas are in, let's say, in opposition of what really needs to happen in the area in order for it to change into a democratic environment that every group can at least represent itself and can at least to some extent administrate over itself. So that is why we see them collaborating in different positions together, even though they have very different projects and that they have very different other interests in the area. On the same hand, I think the same goes for the same regimes, the Iraqi government, the Syrian government, other governments in the region. They all have this idea in common. I think eventually what we have in Syria, as my colleague Mrs. Alloush brought, I think it is a unique experience that as different ethnic groups basically managed to come together to form the administration of North and East Syria after the different battles that we managed to defeat ISIS eventually, and the creation of the administration, I think, was the success of this idea of those groups that we can come together, we can work together, and we can challenge the status quo in the area together and be able to present a different idea. Mrs. Alloush also talked about it, the non-central government eventually, which is our main demand for Syria, and we see it as a key ingredient for the solution in Syria. I think it is both a necessity for this solution, and also as the non-central governance is also the solution for the problems that the Middle East is facing, especially with its very diverse communities and groups of different peoples and cultures living together, and which are very mixed together. I think that is why we need to focus on this matter. I think this pluralistic vision is needed more than ever. No single component, no single group, no single people or ethnic group can really enforce or make the change happen by itself. Eventually, I think what we need is to combine the effort of those different ethnic groups, both groups who are called majority and the groups who are, of course, a word I don't like, a minority, but I would like to have it as very small groups who are, when they are coming together, they form a majority in the area to some extent, and together they can create and they can enforce the change in the area through the work that they have done. And I think what we have managed to achieve as Syrian Democratic Forces and the administration or the democratic administration of North and East Syria through the defeat of ISIS, through the ability to protect our areas and to establish a governance in the chaos or through the chaos of the Syrian crisis, I think is an example of the possibility of such achievement in if those groups decided to work together and come together. I think, on the other hand, one of the other challenges that we are facing in Syria as administration, and also I think it can to some extent apply to the Kurdish role in general, is the maturity of our project, especially in Syria. I think the experience of the administration and the influence of certain ideological ideas are preventing the administration from advancing in a let's say more speedy way. That is, I think, that was also made clear by the officials within the administration itself through the acceptance of the different mistakes that have been applied and happened, and the decision made to work to correct them also together. I think that was one of the main ideas that happened specifically, I think, last year. I think also one of the problems that we are facing on the area, especially in Syria, is the economic situation, basically in northeast Syria, which is a result for the different sanctions over Syria and the lack of opportunities provided for the administration to be able to rebuild itself, to rebuild the destroyed areas, do the fight of against ISIS, and to be able to provide and let's say develop a better way to provide the needed services for the people. On the other hand, I think the opportunities that we can talk about are also very different, but I would like to conclude them in three main points. One of them is this pluralistic and different groups coming together. I think, again, I would like to assert that it is a very big opportunity for the area to change itself and come into a different system that can provide the rights and can provide the ideas and the dreams of the people, especially in Syria, and that would eventually come to our ideas and to our thoughts and vision through non-central democratic governance. The second one is the economic potentials, I think, basically that we have in those regions that we are administrating over, especially in northeast Syria. We have huge economical potentials that can provide, if are used in a correct way and if are supported by the international community, they can provide the necessary base to make the change happen in a very speedy way, or in a very different way than what we had so far. The last point, I think it is the presence of the international coalition, especially the US and European forces, which have the experience and the experience of working together with the SDF, and I think this experience can also have a role or have a similar effect on a joint work and joint work between the on the political aspect, let's say, between those the US government and the European governments with the administration of North and East Syria, to support it politically into being able to represent the aspirations of the Syrian people in general, and to defend or provide an example for the solution in Syria, which can come through a political process, but again, this process needs the presence and the participation of the representatives of the administration of North and East Syria. I would like to conclude it here. I think, I hope I provided a better or some view over those topics that we wanted to talk about, either for the Kurdish people, and as I said, the same goes for the other ethnic and religious groups who are living in the area.
Thank you. Very informative, General Kino. Thank you very much. I would now pose a few questions all together coming from the audience, and then you can sort of start answering them in the order that you prefer, and whichever of those questions you feel that you want to respond. First of all, going 2018, I'm just personally wondering, we have a Russian discourse that believes that the Syrian Kurds should participating in determining the future of Syria, or on a par with other ethnic religious groups, as General Kino discussed about, and that was a sort of firm stance on behalf of the Russian foreign ministry. So I'm wondering, how would you really comment on that, and what does this mean now, today? With regards to this sort of militarization that it's taken place in the Middle East, I was wondering whether you believe that there will be an increase or the sort of political means are more likely to be achieved on the basis that, as Yerevan mentioned, okay, now we're seeing different forms of alliances that have taken place, especially when it comes to the Gulf, and obviously there is an impact on the broader sort of spectrum of alliances in the Middle East. And it is very sort of interesting, because we saw, like, from within GCC countries, that they were really more critical to each other, somehow to be coming together. So what is really the effect of all this on the developments in the Middle East as far as the Kurdish issue is concerned? But General Hajar discussed about the PMU forces and the fact that there is a majority possibly coming under the Iraqi law. But I was wondering, is there still a bigger number of units that they're outside of the sort of control or the recognition of the Iraqi government? And I think, finally, the last question is about the considerations. We talk about certain sort of challenges, opportunities, but when it comes to considerations, are there specific sort of considerations that you believe that they have to be taken into account if really we're talking about a changing region with an outcome that it's possibly to be sort of a witness in the coming years? Thank you.
If I may, I'll start by answering your last question, which is about these, considerations. I think I'm more specifically about talking about the KRG. The last election, which was on October 10th, actually proved that the political landscape, a political map in Iraq has changed, and it has brought new political players on the ground in Iraq, and some of these are independent candidates that will be members of the parliament, and they will have a say in, passing legislation as well as forming the next government. These independent MPs are more responsive to their people, their voters, and also they have more some sort of more nationalistic agenda, and that could prove really challenging for the KRG when they're going to deal with them when it comes to passing legislation, when it comes to the economic and the financial political rights of the Kurds in Iraq. Probably it is best for the KRG try to invest in Baghdad politically. It has to try to invest within these new generation of leaders in Iraq, because the past leader that the KRG, the Kurdish official used to have even like personal relationship, political relationship. They were united when they were fighting Iraq. That area appears comes to come to an end Not now, of course, but probably in 5 years or 10 years is going to happen. So the question is how the KRG is trying to plant the seed of political investment in Iraq so that it can reap its benefits in the future. Because I see this new generation of Iraqi leaders, Iraqi MPs, as a very serious challenge to the KRG, to its autonomous region status, to the to the economic and the financial rises of the Kurds. That's one thing. Secondly, the KRG should try to consider, define it is really grand strategy. For me, the KRG has had some sort of identity crisis since 2017, because until the referendum, the whole push was about we're going to get independent. That has been lost. The new Kurdish generation, the young people who are mostly jobless or don't have job opportunity, they are really frustrated. They have identity crisis that really exists across the Kurdistan region. How the KRG is going to address both the identity crisis of the new generation, how it's going to define its grand strategy, what role is trying to play in the broader region. In the past, it was trying to connect it with great power through the Shining Hill in the Middle East, where democratic autonomous region, and then it came to the being a pillar of stability and the fight against ISIS. These arguments are really weathering, and the KRG needs to find a better argument. Probably it can play a very peaceful role. I think the KRG, the Kurdish leaders can be peacemakers in the region, as there had been some indication of that. In fact, according to some reports, that President Yerevan Barzani was interlocutor between Turkey and the UAE. Can the KRG continue to do that? And what kind of implication that has for the KRG? And because, as I mentioned, reconciliation could have really negative impact on the Kurds. That is, and also secondly, the KRG should really take the issue of economic and political reform very, very seriously. We saw that there was less than 3% of turnout in the election. That includes the Kurdistan regions. That means that the population are almost completely disconnected with the Kurdish political elite. They need to address that if they really want to project power, if they really want to play a greater role in Iraq and also in the region. They really need to put their own house in order economically and also politically.
Thank you.
I will take the one about Russia, Marianna, if it's
yes, please.
I think since the beginning of the crisis in Syria, let's name it revolution, and then now it's a crisis in Syria, Russia was really clear. I mean, the position of Russia was clear. I mean, they are with the regime, and they're supporting this regime, and somehow they think that they win supporting the regime in Syria. But to be clear and to be honest, Russia cannot announce the victory in Syria without having something with Northeast and Northwest. Now, Northwest is clear. I mean, Turkey is controlling there, and somehow if they deal with Erdogan somehow, and if you give the question of Northeast and Northwest to Erdogan, he will choose Northwest. So Northeast. So Northwest is somehow very sure for Russia. They can take it whenever they want, with some change or some giveaway like in Northeast. So the victory cannot be announced without having all the geography of Syria controlled by the regime. We as Northeast, we were very clear since the beginning, and we are still clear. Our doors are open for negotiation with Russia, with the Americans, with the oppositions, with the regime. So we didn't close the doors of negotiation, and we are still in the position of do some negotiation with the regime. And there are some now initiative by the Russian to begin a talk between the Northeast and the regime, Northeast and Turkey. So how much they are serious in that? This is the question, because from our experience with Russia historically, they say something in the meeting rooms and then they say other things in the media. So, and the Afrin was an experience for us, for example, and now Tel Rafat is another experience, because Tel Rafat is controlled by Russian, by SDF, by the Iranian, and Turkey is attacking. So Turkey cannot attack without any green light by the Russian. I don't know how much this is correct, but this is what our memory tells us and what the history tells us. So I think Russia should be somehow clear regarding if he really supports the rights of the other people in Syria or not. Let me explain. I mean, now, okay, the Assad is in controlling, and somehow it's a victory. Okay, so some change should be done in Syria. This change should be multicultural, should respect the rights of other peoples in Syria, the full citizens' rights in Syria, and women's rights in Syria, minority rights in Syria, all this, etc. And one important other thing should be respected is the model of the governance. You cannot go back to 2011. You cannot go back anymore. I mean, if I will talk only about the Northeast, the people tested what to be free, tested what the meaning of having an economic support. We were in a region with very rich economic resources, and we were hungry. So the people during this period, they tested. And we were in Russia just a few weeks ago as Syrian Democratic Council. We discussed all these things with the Russian, and now we are out of the Constitution Committee. We are out of Geneva talk. We are out of Acetana. We are out of everything. And then Russian said, we will ensure the rights of other components. How? If I am not in the whole political process in Syria, how you will ensure my rights? I mean, the mentality of Russia is respect, accept the regime, let the regime come back, and we discussed other things later. Later when? I mean, we as Kurds and Northeast people, I think we think that we should be peacemakers, as Mr. Yerevan said, and we can play this role because the Kurds, after many years and years, they are convinced that no more borders are useful, no more wars are useful. We can lead that, we can respect that. Even in Northeast, we have many peoples, for example, Kurds people, they think that they are ignored by the self-administration because more rights are given to Arab people, to Syrian people. The Kurds are not in the top of everything, you know. So this is a challenge we are facing in Northeast as self-administration and Syrian Democratic Council ethics. So just coming back to Russia, I think after 10 years, they have some victory in Syria. The opposition should respect that they lost. They are not winner anymore. In the war, there are no many winners, but anyway, the Russians should have a clear strategy in Syria in terms of supporting the other components in Syria. This can be through constitution committees, this can be through good dialogue between the other components, peace dialogue, and etc.
Thank you very much. Thank you. General Kino? And then General Hajar, yes.
Yes. I think from my side, I don't have anything to add to what Mrs. Alloush said. I think eventually, I think what we can discuss is the whole process of reaching a political solution in Syria, either through Geneva or Acetana or now the Constitution Committee, etc. they are not working. Again, not every party is represented there, and especially I think for the administration of Northeast Syria is not to be represented in those platforms is not something right. Eventually, let's say both Russia and the US are trying to work their politics around the needs and their interests with both Turkey and Iran in some way. But eventually, I think the main goal should be the rights of the Syrian people and the need to reach this political solution as fast as possible. And eventually that can only be through the representation and the participation of all different parties involved in this conflict. And I think eventually, as I said, what we are providing and the solution that we are suggesting from Northeast Syria is non-central government. And as I said, it is a necessity. And also, I think globally and logically, it is the solution for such different ethnic region and groups living together. So I think it should be considered and it should be supported by both Russia and the US. And I think they really need to just take this step, one step more, to just leave their other interests with Turkey and Iran aside a little bit and just focus on Syria. So for that, I think we'll need to see how it is going to move forward, because currently we have, I think, the same problem with the US also, because they already have withdrawn their forces once from Syria, and that led to an attack and let's say an occupation of one part of Syria to Turkey, which was basically in an area controlled, or let's say supported and protected by the US. So again, as I said, both forces are working in the same direction. I think they really need to together also come closer and find a common ground to work on and to support the right people to reach this political solution. I try to leave it at that. I think it is a big topic to talk about, and it would need a lot of analysis and just coming through the different periods that during the last 10 years.
Yeah, it's true. A US-Russian cooperation maybe it's really necessary in this process of the dialogue. Thank you. And General Hajar. I think there's an internet connection again problem. Yes, can you hear us, General Hajar?
Yes, sorry, I lost connection. Now
yes, it's okay.
Just I would like to add something what Yerevan said about the Kurdistan region can play a peaceful role in the changing the region. Yes, for sure. This is a great idea. And we see now, day after day, President Yerevan Barzani, Masoud Barzani, they have strong relationship with the, for example, with the Gulf state leaders, with Arab state leaders, and even they have a personal relationship, for example, with the King Abdullah in Jordan. They have a relationship with UAE, with Qatar, with Saudi Arabia. So I believe day after day, those countries, they accept the Kurdistan region, and many Arab countries, they open their consulate generals in Kurdistan region, and some others, they have a plan to open consulate and consulate generals or their representative in Kurdistan region, including Qatar. So I believe it will be successful for Kurdistan region if they continue this way to play a peaceful role in the region, in the changing region. And regarding the situation in the near future in Iraq, I believe difficult for the Kurdish people to see big changes in Iraq, because the biggest problem in Iraq is mentality. So we saw the Sunni regime, Saddam's regime, then now we see the Shia regime, the Shia government. Just maybe the name is different, but the mentality, the same mentality. And we have a constitution, which is the main link Kurdistan region with Iraq is the constitution. For 16 years, we are asking the Iraqi federal government to implement Iraqi constitution. I believe they're gonna continue this way. They will not implement the constitution, especially the articles which is related to the Kurd and Kurdistan region. So in the same hand, because I am not optimistic to see big changes in Baghdad and Iraq. So about that, on the other hand, we should work to continue build our region and to do serious reform, economic reform, and the Peshmerga reform, and the security reform, as we started in 2017. And the good thing, now we have a coalition forces supporting the Peshmerga and the Ministry of Peshmerga, especially supporting the Ministry of Peshmerga of implementing Peshmerga reform program. And I believe you had a question for me regarding the Shia militia groups or popular mobilization forces. I missed that. Could you repeat your question, please?
Yeah, one of the questions is if there is a sort of still big number of PMU outside of sort of this recognition, vis-a-vis the constitution.
This is the issue with Baghdad. By law and constitution, the Ministry of Peshmerga, part of the Iraqi security forces, and we should have a law, and we should receive our budget from Baghdad. We should receive weapons, ammunition from Baghdad, but never they provided our budget, and never they provided 1 penny for the Peshmerga forces. As I said, in one day, they made law for Hajj al-Sha'bi, and they passed Hajj al-Sha'bi's law in the Iraqi parliament. But the problem, they are not one group. They are more than 60, 70 different groups. Some of them belong to Al-Marja'iyya, belong to As-Sistani, some of them belong to As-Sadr, some of them belong to Iran, honestly. And they are implementing Iranian agenda in Iraq. And for many times, they attacked US bases, including Erbil airport, by drones. And I believe they're going to continue this way. So still there are many, by name, they are all of them under the control of the Iraqi government. But the reality, maybe half of them, they are not controlled by the Iraqi federal government, and they are not implementing the order which is comes from the Iraqi government or comes from the Iraqi prime minister. For example, we have a 30 brigade, which is they are Shabak in Mosul Plain. They are belong to Hajj al-Sha'bi. Many times they attacked Erbil and Erbil airport. So many times Iraqi prime minister ordered them to leave Mosul Plain, but they refused the order from the Iraqi prime minister, and still they are exist in the area. So as I said, they are not just trying to control the security forces, but also they are trying to control the power, the administration, the government. This is really a danger sign for the future of Iraq. So about that, we should be more careful about the future of Iraq, and we should work in our home, and we should do real reform of the security forces and real economic reform. And we should continue act as we did, because international community respect Kurdistan region, not just because we are Kurd, but because we are respect other people like Christian, Yazidi, Turkmen, Arab, and we are tolerance. So this is a big sign for us, and this is a successful point. For example, now in Congress, 2 congressmen, one Democratic and the other one Republican, they have law project for the Congress to have a strategic relationship with Kurdistan region, because they are saying Kurdistan regional government respecting the human rights, respecting other minorities, respecting Christian, Yazidis, So this is a successful point. We should continue act this way. Thank you very much.
I hope our discussion today opened one more window for further thought, and I really thank all of you, our distinguished speakers today, for their informative contributions, and I hope to see you soon. Also, I would like to thank all those who watched us today, and I'm sure that this series can contribute further to regional matters, and in particular the case of the Kurdish role in the broader region. Thank you very much. Thanks again, and it was an honor to have you with us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marianna. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a good night.